Okay, welcome back to Think Education podcast. I'm Chris Hill, joined as ever by Judith Lammy. I went neutral. And Judith, I wanted to ask you a couple of quick, easy questions. Do we have a guest today?
Yes or no? Yes, I think we do.
And does this guest have any connection to Wales?
You know what? I think she might.
All right. Well, so we've had a few chats of our own recently, and it's a great pleasure to be able to broaden that conversation out. I will hand over to you for the formal introduction, but I'm very interested in where this conversation is going to go, because when I was looking up the background of this guest, there are some very interesting entries under her publication record, which are not expected, but they're kind of in the back pocket, depending on where the conversation goes. So I'm really looking forward to this one. But I'll hand over to you for the formal professional and adult introduction.
Thank you very much. I always like it when you say that, because I always feel like I've got to sit up straight and actually do this properly. We're delighted today to have Dr. Gosia Drewniok joining us. Now, before I give you the formal introduction, just to make sure that I pick up on Chris's second question there. Gosia and I actually met in person last year at Swansea University when I was hosting an event, and Gosia was there, and we'll come on shortly to why we immediately clicked and had a connection there when I'm giving the introduction. So that's the sort of Welsh link. Not that either of us are in Wales now, but
we're now literally going to people that you've met while in Wales.
Yes,
that's how far we've broadened it.
That's how this is a fluid networking community.
Just any connection we can hang on to.
That is how it works. Yeah, all roads lead to Swansea, apparently.
Well, there we are. There we are.
Yeah. All Italians listening, forget Rome. It's actually Swansea. So, Gosia is currently Assistant Director for International Student Success at the University of Bristol. She's got a PhD in linguistics, pause, bracket. All the best people have PhDs in linguistics. We all know this. And yes, this was one of the reasons why we ended up chatting in the first place. Gosia started her career, again, brackets, all the best people do this, teaching English for academic purposes, EAP, study skills and research skills, before moving into leadership roles. So with these introductions, as you know, I mean, this is a real short potted version, to be honest. We could talk for ages and ages just about Gosia's own background, but we don't want to get to that. We want to actually get to hear Gosia speak. Otherwise, people are going to go, she's not here. They're just talking about her. She's not here at all. She's probably gone and made a cup of tea now. So before joining Bristol, Gosia was head of English Language Centre, later the International College at the University of Lincoln. And as a former international student herself, she's passionate about supporting international students in UK HE and working towards removing barriers to their success, something I know that's close to the heart of all of us here today, but all of us listening, no doubt. She's a strong believer in collaboration and a holistic approach to student success. And with much of the discussion on internationalisation focusing on recruitment and outward engagement, and certainly that's something that Chris and I talk about a lot as well, Gosia herself is very vocal about the duty of care we have towards the students already involved in our institutions, lest we forget that. Gosia is an active member of BARLEAP, and many of you will know that. Certainly I know that, myself, been associated with BARLEAP for many, many a year. So that's the British Association for Lecturers in EAP, and other communities as well, which maybe we might touch upon a little bit later. So in her current role, she's working across the whole of the university, and she leads on bringing together different initiatives and activities contributing to improving the international student experience and, really importantly, international student success. So we're really delighted, Gosia, that you're joining us today, not just because we have that Welsh connection, and not just because, although largely you got a PhD in linguistics, but also because you're going to give us a bit of structure and direction to our sessions, because sometimes you've listened to them, they can be a bit random. But today we did think it will be a wonderful opportunity to talk to you in particular about, you know, students, how we support the students that we've already got here as well. So I'm going to hand over to you now, maybe just to give us a little bit more of a flavour of some of the things that you're interested in, some of the things that you've done maybe prior to what you're actually focusing on at the moment at the University of Bristol. Maybe you could touch upon a couple of the things that you've done. You've done quite a lot of writing. We know that, you know, if you go actually and look at Gosia on LinkedIn, and we're certainly LinkedIn as well, so please do that and connect in with Gosia. You know, you'll see the fascinating background that she's got. But I thought maybe you could start with that, picking out a couple of the things that you have been doing that you found particularly interesting and fascinating, and why you've ended up, you know, exploring those, given your own background as well. So over to you, Gosia, to introduce yourself a little bit more, but maybe tell us about a few of the things that you find particularly interesting.
Thank you, Judith, and thanks to both of you for having me in this podcast. This was a great introduction, so no pressure for me here. I think, like you said in my introduction, I have always worked with international students, and I came as an international student to the UK originally, long time ago. I'm originally from Poland, and I made the most of Poland joining EU in 2004. So I came in 2005 as a student and stayed because I wanted to study in an English-speaking country. And I think as a new student, I actually had a very challenging experience, great experience, but challenging, because I came and joined year 3 as an undergraduate. So this was difficult because there was lots of pressure. I had no idea how UK education worked, how assessments worked, you know, how referencing worked. I also always choose the difficult path. So I was doing modules in linguistics and literature. So this was hard because different referencing systems, different approaches. I always do that myself. And I think the first year I thought, like, I'll just do it and go back home. And then I said, oh, actually, I want to stay in the UK to do a master's when I go home. I always wanted to be a language teacher. I came already as a EFL qualified teacher, but I wanted to get this experience. But after my master's experience, I thought, oh no, I want to stay here. And actually, because of my experience, I was thinking, you know, I didn't have a lot of support. I just got by because I asked questions and relied on my friends and tutors. Like, I asked tutors what I'm supposed to be doing. But I saw that there's this niche and gap that we're not doing at that point 20 years ago. There wasn't so much support for international students. And I was thinking, this is what I would like to do based on my personal experience. And actually, during my master's, I took a module that was study skills, research skills for the dissertation. And I thought, actually, this is what I want to do. And I asked my tutors how to get into this. They gave me some tips and I followed that. And it's how I got into teaching EIP. And I really wanted to continue studying. I'm a really big nerd, so I wanted to study and continue studying. And that's why I did a PhD. And this is the same place where I did my master's at Lancaster University. And I started teaching already then. And I think the biggest drive for what I've been doing all my life, it is this care about students, that I really want to support students and help them through this journey where, you know, at that point, not many people thought what international student needs in terms of telling them how the system works, how language works in UK education, so to support them through all this. So I think that's how I found myself in this. And after my PhD, I got a teaching job in studies, academic studies skills. So actually, this was a point where I thought, well, I could go linguistics, I could do this, and I got this job working with international students on a master's program, a very international program, preparing them for final project and dissertation. And I think as my career went on, I was thinking, what else could I be doing? So I started just teaching foundation, undergraduate students, postgraduate students, pre-sessional courses. But then I thought, what else could I be doing? I would like to contribute more. And now I have more and more experience. And that's how I ended up at Lincoln, where I started with being a program manager, and I quickly got promoted to head of the whole center. And then I was able to be in those conversations, like, what do we do to support students? And not just what we teach, but being in the conversations with heads of services, sometimes even with senior leadership, and being this person who would be the voice for international students. And I think I really enjoyed that. Not because I wanted power, but I just wanted to make sure that the students are advocated for, that someone is there saying, what about international students? What about this, what we're doing? So I think that's how it developed. And then the opportunity arose for my role that I'm currently in. And I thought this is a natural step for me. So I was focused until then on the language and study skills and all this side, although I was still thinking about all the holistic experience. But this job that I have now was specifically written about the whole student journey. And I thought this is perfect for me, because this is what I want to look at. So not just learning experience, but also the whole experience, pre-arrival, induction, welcome, transition into the study, transition from level to level, and until students graduate. And this was an interesting transition, because for me, it made complete sense. For lots of people from my EAP community, it didn't. And they were asking me, why did you leave EAP? And I didn't feel I left EAP. I just felt this is the natural step to the sort of wider focus, I think. And that's why I'm here with you today, because wider still is thinking, how do we think about international student experience while they're already with us? I think that's something I'm really passionate about.
That's fantastic, Gosia. And Chris, you're going to have to jump in when you can jump in, because you've got two linguists here. So we're just going to sit and have a chat if you're not careful. But I do think there are two in particular, I think, interesting things for us to reflect on there. One is the latter point is the one that really we're here to talk about today, and that's how we support international students, how you support international students, your view on that, maybe your view on how that's changed over the years. You touched upon it there, which I think is very interesting, and that move, in a sense, or that evolution from looking at study skills and looking at, the practicalities of how are you going to help a student to do what they need to do in order to write what they need to write, or, develop what they need to develop, to actually more broadly what the success and the whole journey is like. But the other point I wondered whether we might just touch on first, because you just articulated it so perfectly, was your route to where you got to, the route to the leadership position you were in. I mean, Chris and I were just talking about this the other day, weren't we, Chris? And we were talking about it in terms of leadership and the evolution of sort of leadership roles. And I know this will be something that, Gosia, you and I also will touch upon in the book that, and the chapter, in one of the chapters of the book that we're currently putting together on managing change in international higher education. So you've really taken, it seems anyway, a very focused route to, you've actually thought about where you're going to go and done things. I just think this is, I've been talking to a few people recently who are themselves at points in their career where not quite sure what they want to do and where they want to go. And I'm thinking, what can I do now to help me get to where I want to get to? And it seems to me that is something in particular that you did do while you were en route. You almost, and I don't know whether you thought 3 steps ahead or 1 step ahead or 2 steps ahead, but that certainly seems to be something that you know, I'm just thinking of also how that might help people, some of the people listening, you know, how you map that route out from when you arrived. I mean, maybe you didn't think of it right then. You were probably thinking, oh, I'm coming, I'm going to do my studying here, and then I'm going to go off and do this. But then it seemed to change your mind when you were here, and then you've taken this route. And I wondered if you could just reflect a little bit more on that, maybe.
Thank you. I think this is a really good question. I think it makes more sense with hindsight rather than the pre-planning. So I definitely wasn't 5 steps ahead. I was thinking where I wanted to go. But I think when I was doing my PhD, and I think this is what Chris was referring to earlier, that my PhD was about popular culture, and I had a very diverse group of friends and peers during my PhD. And what I wanted to do is get a lectureship in linguistics, in stylistics. This is my area. But I needed a job. I was self-funded for my PhD. I didn't have any scholarship, and I thought, like, I'm finishing, I really need a job. So I was teaching from my PhD, but I needed a full-time job. And I got this job, my first job, which was teaching academic study skills. And it was great because it was full-time and permanent at the Russell Group University. But I saw this at the very beginning just as a stepping stone to where I wanted to be, because actually I got it based on my experience, not on my PhD. I was already qualified. I was already experienced teacher. And I think at the very beginning, I thought, like, okay, I'll do this for a little bit, and then I'll get this lectureship eventually. But it never happened. I'm a big practitioner, and I like being with students and teaching and talking to people. I'm getting better, especially in recent years, but I wasn't great at writing for publication and doing like primary research. At that point, I was more focused on the student experience. So for a couple of years, I was like, I really want to get this lectureship, but it's not happening. And I had to have this moment of reflection where I felt, actually, I need to do something, because I'm not happy in this sort of place where I am in my thoughts. And to be successful, I can do different things. And I felt what I really wanted to do, I had 3 things: be with students, teach students, stay in higher education, and my skills and expertise being used. This was like my 3 key priorities. And I started applying for different jobs, and suddenly discovered actually I can have a career in EIP. So it didn't happen overnight. It was just, okay, now I'm not getting where I thought I would be, so I'm going to follow what I'm good at and what I care about. And I started getting interviews, and that's how I got my next job, which was teaching foundation, and then how I got to Lincoln. When I was at Lincoln, I became a program manager, and it was still just managing the teaching. I never thought about managing people or budgets of departments. And then I was in the right place at the right time. I had a really, really supportive manager who saw something in me, I think. And she encouraged me to apply for the head role when it opened, and she promoted me. And then I suddenly realized that I actually enjoy being in a leadership role. I like running a department. I like not managing people, but supporting people and helping them grow and develop and sort of coaching them. And being this voice for students. So actually I found I'm much better in this than if I was a lecturer just working on my own. So I think since then I started thinking, okay, this is where I want to go. And this was more planned, but at the beginning it wasn't. It was more planned. And then after 5 years being the head at Lincoln, I thought, like, I need a new challenge. And then I was thinking, what else could I do? And this was a natural progression to a more holistic, a wider role somewhere else. But I think it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't planned at the very beginning. And I think this is useful for everyone to think. I don't think many people have this at the very beginning of a career. I think what is important is to be open and learning at each stage, talking to people and seizing opportunities when they come. I think that's what I've been doing.
I mean, it's funny because it sounds very familiar to stuff that Judith and I have discussed. I mean, I like you, I thought I wanted to be a lecturer. I ended up moving to a different country to set up a graduate school. So in kind of the same student support type of a thing. And I would never have got to where I am today, which is something I find really interesting, had I gone the lecturer route. What I think is something that struck me, and actually this was a question I had from the very beginning, from Judith's introduction, and you've just touched on it again here. So it's this notion of the word success, because the question I was going to ask you was, how do we, if you're talking about supporting student success, what does that mean? Like, what do we, is it graduate? Is it they've made 5 friends? Like, because it's such a very, very broad topic or construct even. And then your point just now was how you think about your own success, and it's not chasing a title or a pathway that you initially thought was going to be. And clearly you've had considerable impact by taking a different path. And I thought that was an interesting way that you obviously self-reflect and you can perceive of success in a way that has value beyond what might be seen as kind of the pathway. So I was just wondering if you could maybe unpick what you think about and how you think about success, and then how that relates to what you try to support the students to achieve. I apologize because it's a really big question. But yeah, I was really interested in the way that you were explaining your journey, and I think the how you are at peace with what you have done, but you have not settled. You've in essence you've reframed and recreated a pathway, and like the most of the rest of us, it then makes sense when you look backwards. So yes. Any thoughts you had?
Yeah, it is a really good point. I think it took me a long while to get to here in terms of reflection, because I'm naturally an optimistic person, and I want to look at, well, what can I do? There's things that I can't influence, and there are things that I can influence. So if I can't make it here, I'm going to think what I can do, and that's how I approached changes in my career so far. But you're right, like success is sort of it depends what you, if you look at measurables, right? Everyone talks about, oh, you're at this, in terms of career, you're at this point, you this salary, and you're that important. And actually what you mentioned about yourself, it happens to me as well, but I wouldn't be a professor now, right? Like if I probably would still be maybe senior lecturer if I went into lectureship, but I'm at that level now as a director. So I wouldn't get where I am through the lectureship route. For me personally, in my career, success would be really doing what matters to me, doing, following the things that I'm passionate about, but also things that I'm good at and I have expertise, and my expertise and my skills being used for it, right? So, and it could be different. And I think the older I am and the more experience I have, I worry less about what other people would think. So if the change makes sense to me, like I moved 2 years ago in my role, then it makes sense to me, and this is success because I'm using what I've learned and all my expertise, and I can have a more impact on student experience. So I think that's how I look at it. And I constantly revisit it because my next step might be completely different. We'll see, watch this space. For students, it's a bit more tricky, I think, depending how you look at it. So if you are in a role like mine, you have to think about measurables, right, for this success. And when I got the job, this was a brand new role. So I was meeting lots of people, and I had to explain to everyone what it is. And they asked, well, what do you mean by international student success? So you have to think about measurables. Is it progression from year to year? Is it attainment? Is it what the degrees, right? The graduation, and whether they got the degrees they wanted to. So I think those are the measurables. I really don't like the numbers, but I think this is what we look at. One thing that I'm really passionate about, especially in terms of master students, which is sort of like a hidden aspect, which I keep flagging to lots of colleagues currently, is for master students, whether they get the degree they enrolled on. Because there are students who will not get a full master's, right? They might get a PG Dip or PG Cert. And you see when they get something and they disappear from our campuses, but I don't think this is a full success if they intended to get a master's. And so for students, it's also whether they had experience they wanted, and also whether they achieved what they wanted to achieve, so the degree they wanted. But to achieve this for all of us, we really need to think about all the barriers that are there for students, right? So they come, they meet our entry requirements, they have this all potential, but there might be certain things on the way that will be a barrier for them to get the success they want. Not necessarily their academic achievement or them not working hard, but there are other things. And that's what I'm working towards. So on a personal level, it's more, do you get what you want, and do you get a good experience on the way? But in terms of students, I think we'd have to look at measurables, right? At least the senior leadership would look at it. And when you want to show impact, you need to look at the numbers and the impact. So yeah, it's those two things, depending how you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, before I just hand back to Judith, this is exactly what Judith and I were talking about last week, right? Which is a university is a combination of the philosophical value experience underpinned by the business measurable reality, right? Because, you know, if you recruit 400 students and none of them graduate, well,
Yeah.
right, what are we doing, right? It's so yeah, it's I think that's an important that holistic approach seems often at competition with each other, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to being kind of an integrated reality. But yeah, no, I mean that makes tremendous tremendous sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think, as you just said there, Chris, as well, you know, in one way, if student comes and their goal at the beginning was to get a master's in X, and they got that, let's say they got a distinction or something, you know, then maybe they're happy. We'll come back to that in a moment. The university is deliriously happy because that goes into, you know, their measurables, and that adds to, you know, a gold measure somewhere, I would imagine, there. But actually, if halfway through the process the student decides that they don't want to do that, and actually they want to go and do something else, but the process of them coming to do it has opened up another door for them to go in a different direction, and they might leave, they might go and set up a company making widgets, or they might go and do whatever, you know, decide that they want to be an artist. They might want to just anyway go and do something completely different. Where they might end up might for them actually be a success, because they've found what they want to do, and they're deliriously happy, and they're wonderful painting their things and making the widgets and all that sort of stuff. But actually at the university they will be measured as a failure.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a really complex issue.
Yeah.
Because actually it's not. And if we only ever think of students as it's almost like taking an exam, isn't it? If you take this exam and you get 100%, then you're a success. Well done, off you go. But actually, maybe they have done that, but really they're not happy with that. They don't want to do that. They want to do something else. It's almost like at university, you should be enabling people to fail, to not be, I suppose I want to come back in a moment, Gosia, to just what a success is actually. Is it a goal? Is it something at the end? Is it something in the middle? Is it more of a verb, you know, in some ways, although linguistics obviously is not, you know, but, you know, it's a really thorny issue, isn't it? Because it really comes down to how you define a success. And I think one of the most telling things, and I'll come back to you then in a second, Gosia, was how you described it yourself, in terms of how you described what it was for you, you know, and what happens along the way. And that's also partly how you measure your success. And then separately, how we measure it for students. What are those measurables? Is it progression? Is it attainment? And in one way, in order to do, and I'm not saying that those things aren't important. Of course I'm not, you know, lest Mrs. Trellis writes in and tells me that this is the wrong thing to do. I'm not saying that that's not important. It's just that I think the other is equally important too. And it's somehow, therefore, how we might somehow capture that, and make people realise that there are other elements to success, that indeed, in order to get to success, you have to fail a lot of times, don't you? Because you learn so much more from it. It's just that we're probably a little bit happier at university if people fail elsewhere and they don't fail within our own institution because it affects our own marks. You know, should we be? So sorry, none of that probably made any sense. But it just seems to me that there's that almost that real sort of notion about just what success is in the first place, how you might get there.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense to me. Thank you, Judith. I think this is sort of going back to, you know, at the risk of sounding controversial, to how we understand universities, right? Because I like this idea that we are, as an education institution, to help students grow when we teach them. And, you know, we can go in the discussion of Mickey Mouse degrees and things like that, or whether we are a business and we need to make sure that we have met our KPIs and enough students progressed and enough students we recruited. And I think we're, in many roles that we hold, we're caught between those two, right? Like I personally would like to focus on creating the best possible experience for students. And you are very right that there are things that students would consider success. It's, you know, becoming more confident, becoming more intercultural, making friends with students from around the world, and like first time living independently in a different country. For me, this was a success. You know, I came from Poland to London and had to survive on my own. So for our students, it would be that. And you reminded me of something that I'm really passionate about. I think might resonate with Chris as well. Is I have worked a lot with doctoral students, and as someone with a PhD who went a less common route and also worked on professional services contracts, I feel really strongly about this lectureship or failure, and I like to talk to doctoral students about what is success after a PhD, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean you got this coveted lectureship because there's not enough jobs or tenure, right? You might be doing other things where you feel fulfilled, you get a good salary, you're using your skills, and you can be in professional services, you can be outside the university and in other sectors. And I think this is really important. And when I was finishing my PhD, I got my job, which wasn't a lectureship, and all my peers got lectureships or was taught, you know, within the research area. And I felt like, yeah, I have a job, I have a salary, but I'm not where I want to be. And for a while, I thought I'm not as good as they are. And then one of my supervisors told me, wait, you were always my success story. And it totally changed the way I looked at my path, because she said they were doing 0 hours contracts in lots of different institutions, and you got a permanent full-time position before you even submitted. And I was like, oh, okay. So now when I'm in doubt, I always hear my supervisor's voice. So it is, I think, going back to what success means for students, it is we're caught between those two things: the ideology, what we want to achieve in education, and we are a business and we need to achieve certain things. How do we marry it? It's really difficult, because if you are responsible for student success, then you really need to show that you're making impact. And I found in my role, it's very vague for international side. It's more clear cut with home students, where you think about access and participation plan, and you need to think this is what you need to show. For international, it's vague. So on one hand, you can shape it, but on the other, you don't have a structure.
Yeah.
So I think it's complex.
Because what I think is fascinating about this debate is less that those two elements of what a university is are in competition with each other, because I don't think they need to be. I think what's actually in flux is the fundamental point of a university and our understanding of that as an institution. Because once you shift that and you move into the conversation about vocational, and you move into the conversation about skills development, and you move into the conversation about value to community outside of the traditional degree boxes, which frankly we should have moved beyond anyway, just when we look at the employability agenda. And if you make that shift philosophically and you say, well, actually the university is a breeding ground for development, as you say, becoming an adult, or becoming more culturally aware, or aligning yourself to the SDGs, or you know, whatever the focus might be, rather than saying, well, we need these specific degrees. Because if we retain that perspective, it's going to be at odds, right? Because as soon as a student moves, then that is a failure by one particular metric, and we can prove success by kind of a flawed metric, right? It's a quantitative value, but it doesn't remotely take into account the individual experience. And so I think actually the conflict is not in the two sides of how university is developing. Sorry, it's how it's put together. It's the fact that the very purpose of a university itself is we're holding on to something that frankly needs to be updated. Let's put it mildly. And in so doing, that focus on the student experience and the value of the individual. I appreciate, as you say, Gosia, it's very hard to measure because from an international student perspective, it makes sense that an institution says, well, we look at the number of international students that came in and we look at the number of that graduated, and kind of the government doesn't want them to stay, so we don't worry about longitudinal employability studies, right? It's maybe our success metric is, well, we got a government X to sponsor 10 international students, and that's a big thing for us. But them as people, they're not people, right? They're data points, and that's a problem. But because that's a reality, we don't have to think about them in the same way that we maybe should. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating battleground, right? In ideology and purpose. And I don't know who's winning.
We could say do that for all students, couldn't we? In some ways, therefore, but actually, I think Gosia's point is very pertinent too. Though there are other ways, there are other even formal metrics, aren't there, that are used for non-international students that that at least give you a little more wiggle room in this, a bit more flexibility, be able to be putting down on paper, demonstrating to others, demonstrating in some way that other achievements have been created through that whole process before you get to one point of a success metric. And we don't have that on a systematic basis for international students, do we? And I guess the point is, can we and should we somehow get that, because then that will help shape that direction at university, won't it? I mean, it must be challenging sometimes, gosh, if you in the role that you've got to try and do that when all of the main metrics are focusing in on the things that they naturally will when we look at international students.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's both challenging and exciting. So it was very exciting at the beginning, thinking like I can do anything. But then, like, if you don't have structures, there's so much to be done. And I think it's sometimes really useful to have sort of more structure and know what you need to show. So that's why it's useful to have some kind of strategy over university, or overarching strategy or plan, thinking, what do we want to show, how do we want to build to support students. It was interesting. There was an article quite recently in Times Higher Ed. I forgot the author, but he was talking about the global widening participation, which I think is such an important point, because when we talk about widening participation, we mostly talk about home students and we think this is our duty. But when we think about international students, very often it's sort of like, I sometimes have the impression, and I know that it's not everywhere, but sometimes there's this feeling that it's sort of students come fully formed to us, they meet the requirements, they pay the fees, and they should be like perfectly prepared for the study. And of course, even if they meet all the requirements and they're very strong academically, which they are, they still need some kind of support with transition. And sometimes this support is seen maybe as a nice to have and difficult to get investment in, because this is not part of this commitment to what we think about widening participation. Or so I really like this global widening participation thinking, like we're giving opportunities to students from everywhere, and this is our duty as institutions. I think I really like this idea.
I think we should unpick that a little bit more, talk about it a little bit more anyway. Gosia, I think that is one of the most important points I've ever heard, across any of the discussions I've had about anything. How many times have we all heard in situations when we have been talking about some of our students, or maybe a couple of our international students? I must have heard hundreds of times, sadly, people saying, well, they've come to our country, they've got didn't they get the English language requirement? So why is there a problem? Why do we have to support them? How many times have we heard that? I have certainly heard it a significant number of times from, quite frankly, people who should know better. And actually that means anybody that works anywhere and does anything, everybody should know better. And as you say, would you say any of that about other students, about home student, about a student that's just come from a school down the road and say, oh, well, you know, they've got their A levels, they've just come from this school down here and they've come here. Why should we be supporting them? They've got what they should have got, you know, otherwise you wouldn't be doing anything, would you? But somehow we feel as though, or people feel as though they're justified in saying that when it's an international student, don't they? And therefore then, as you say, we need to be supporting them when they're with us. Of course we do, because they don't come as fully formed human beings. You know, they come with people that need that kind of support to help them on the journey that they're on, just like we're all on that kind of a journey as well. But then you have to persuade people to resource you to do that. And I imagine, now I don't want us to spiral into anything that's a bit too negative here, because there are lots of successes that Gosia maybe can touch upon in what she has been doing with students, but that must be a challenge. That must be a challenge, trying to convince people
it is
do what you're doing.
It is. I think, you know, what you've been saying about how we see international students versus how we see home students, I wonder, this is sort of my thinking, whether this comes from the fact that we don't know enough where our students coming from and their background, and also we homogenize them. And if you worked like we have, all three of us, if you have worked in international education for the last 20 years, you know that our demographics of students have changed. And then now we have TNE, which is also completely different, mix of students. But even those coming to UK, they have changed. And maybe 15 years ago, it was different. Those students were different. They might have been straight out of school, you know, very well funded from specific markets, and now they are changing. And we also have mature students, you know, self-funded students, first-gen students from lots of different countries. And so they are more and more, a lot of them are similar to our home students that are from widening participation background. But maybe we don't think about it. We just assume this is the sort of homogeneous group of students. And this is part of what I'm trying to do, where I want to make sure that we're more sensitive to it and we're really learning where our students are coming from, about their culture, about their context. I love teaching, and I don't teach students anymore currently, but I do a lot of workshops with staff that I call Working with International Students. And I really try to build the sensitivity. We can't learn everything about all our students, but like build the sensitivity and really ask questions to students and learn about where they're coming from. Be curious, not just assume. And I think a lot of this possibly comes from the fact that we don't know enough and we just have an assumption about what we need and where they're from and what their experience is.
This reminds me, I was in Xi'an in China back in September, and I was giving a sort of a talk thing on a panel with the faculty that teaches in English to the international students. And several of the academics were saying, well, you know, we have a really difficult challenge because we try to conform our teaching style to the international students, and that's difficult for our lecturers because, you know, you've got 98% of the students are say homogenous local and a couple of international, and they're trying to adapt and they're trying to do this. And they said, you know, we think this is really important, you know. And I said, why do you do that? We don't do that in Britain. In Britain, we make the international students conform to us. They came here, it's their choice. We fold them in and treat them, this is the British system, get on with it. And they said, oh, so we shouldn't. I was like, no, what you are doing is absolutely brilliant, but it's counter to what, you know, what would be if it was the other way around. And that expectation, as you said, where, well, they're here, they chose to be here, they got the relevant degree pre-requirements, get on with it. And it's like, but it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it does work like that from a system perspective, but it should not work like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The question is it right? And I
no,
don't agree.
The answer is no.
It's right.
Yes.
We should adapt. And I think my challenge, you know, when I work with teaching colleagues is thinking, you know, we're not, and when I taught as well, is not about teaching the imaginary perfect student you have,
Sure,
right? You're
sure.
supposed to be teaching the ones that you have in your classroom, and especially if it's very international but very diverse, you want to be very. I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think that's what we should be doing, right? So this is the question. We part of my work, I really try to sort of influence in small ways. It is hard, I would say, but I think that's how we should be approaching teaching, and whatever we do to make it more accessible and more diverse is beneficial to all students, right? Like if
Absolutely.
little things that I often advise is, making it more accessible, assessment briefs or instructions, right? And in terms of language and format, and because if it's very dense, our international students using English as a second language, they might be set up for failure because they just don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But if we do it, this is obviously beneficial for all students, including, for example, our neurodivergent students, right? So this is something that we're doing for all. But yeah, we should, I feel strongly about it, we should really support and teach students we have and think like what they need and listen to them. And when we teach in terms of our content and curriculum, but also in terms of the ways we teach, be really culturally responsive. So it's really interesting what you said about China, and it's great to hear that they're trying to do this.
Yeah.
Right.
It's, I mean, Judith and I have come back to this time and time again, that what's really interesting, I suppose, normal, those of us that have worked in international higher education, whichever form it may be, because we've been outside of our own comfort zone, often linguistically as well as sort of geographically, there is a greater sense of empathy that you develop, because you know what it's like to have no idea what's going on and to feel completely stupid because you can't express yourself or you can't read fluently what's being said. And so yeah, that sensitivity, which is an intercultural competency, and it is a skill that we're preaching that we're teaching, but we're not necessarily doing it from a systemic perspective,
or indeed often actually from a teacher's perspective.
Well, yeah,
it's like you said a moment ago, Gosia, with regard to curiosity. We talk to our students, we encourage our students to be curious, to explore things, to be intellectually curious about things. And we won't, very often the teachers and the lecturers themselves won't do it themselves. You've got a wealth of material in your classroom, in your lecture room, when you've got a vibrant international environment, haven't you? And actually, if you use that yourself as part of your teaching environment, it will do the exciting, curious bit for you. You can almost sit back and
just sit back and enjoy it. Yeah,
let it go on, instead of almost trying to fight it, or almost trying to make some bits of it somehow not conform to actually what isn't a standard teaching structure anyway. Is going against what actually could be a really positive and curious environment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if people can realize that, if you can say, well, actually, if you did this, it actually makes your life easier and it's more exciting, it's more innovative
for everyone.
For everyone, yes, including
for
you.
Everyone. Yeah, I think there's a paradox there, because on one hand, like we said a while ago, there might be this assumption that international students come with, they're perfectly formed because they made our entry requirements, they meet English language requirements, they should be able to study, so why do we need extra support for them? But then on the other, especially in content teaching, it might be that they are blank slates, so we need to teach them our ways. But this is not true, like you just said. There's such a wealth of knowledge there, especially in terms of their context. I once taught on a master's for fashion marketing and branding, which was like the most exciting thing to learn about creative industries. But what my favorite part of the job was that we learned from the students, and they had like practical tasks about, for example, introducing brand to a different market. And they really use their own experience. And I think this is the best thing, like you just said. So it's just an example that they were saying they were introducing to their home country. So they were the experts in the knowledge, local knowledge, and they just used what they were learning. And I think this is the best way of, thinking about our international student population, not just students, but also staff, and how we use this sort of specialist knowledge of their background in what we're doing. And I don't think we use it enough, I think, in many places.
Absolutely. I mean, and very often, and that's a very good example, isn't it? Very often we will, particularly if we've got mature students in our classes, or, you know, we'll bring in that actual sort of physical knowledge about things. I mean, we're both in, you know, applied linguistics and those areas. I mean, of course, you will do that when you've got teachers in your classroom. You bring their background and knowledge, you use that, but you don't always use it to shape the pedagogy that you've got, which you can, of course. It makes it that much richer, doesn't it? It means you're learning from people in all different sorts of ways as well. Gosia, we could talk to you forever, and indeed we will talk to you again. Well, as you know, and now you know, Chris and I, there's no escape, as other people will know this. We're delighted that you're going to also be contributing to our latest book. That would be fantastic, and there might be some things in what we've talked about, I think, today as well, that we can incorporate and talk about further there. But I'll hand it back to Chris in a moment just for some final words. But I did just want to say thank you very much, you know, for coming on, for joining us today. You've raised, in true podcast, Think Education podcast standards, you've raised more questions than you have given answers. So you're a fit perfectly from that. But so for us, that's a success. For us, that's definitely a success. But no, we want to thank you very much. It's been fascinating. We look forward to talking to you again. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, no, I mean, this has been wonderful. We didn't even get to talk about Buffy. Or Third Space, or all of these other things we can continue on. But I think what's kind of the underlying message for me that came out of everything you were saying is something that Judith and I have been talking and thinking about for a long time, which is the fact that a university is made up of people. Right? It is an institution, it is a structure, and it is a business structure. Yes, but there are people with expectations and everything else that goes along it at the heart of it, and keeping that in mind, whether it's from the student or the staff perspective, you know, that message that you're giving, I think is critical. And it goes obviously beyond international student support. It goes to mental health and well-being for staff. It goes, you know, we are an institution of people, and I think it's important that we keep that in mind, right? And the day, I mean, it happened thankfully for me quite early on in my career, but the day that I understood that students were people, because the label of a student and the label of a teacher creates a dynamic which you can reinforce, right? Or you can deconstruct. And when you realize, no, they are people, you know, with a world outside of the four walls that you're in, and they have their own expertise and good days and bad days, as do you, then you can have a conversation, then you can have a dialogue, and then you can start to build, you know, whether it's, you know, through that conversation, or the internationalization at home that we were talking about, Judith, you know, with Rochelle not that long ago. And that comes through understanding that people are people. And back to what you said, Gosia, that success doesn't always look the way we think it is or should, right? But it doesn't mean it's any less valuable. So this has been fascinating, and I've just, you know, looking at the clock, we've been talking for about an hour, and I genuinely thought we had about half an hour left in the slot. So yeah, no, this has been wonderful, and hopefully you'll come back and we can talk about other things. But yeah, just thank you so much for your time and for your input and expertise. It's been fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and on that note, Judith, over to you for the last something.
The last.
I don't know, something. Yeah.
No, just yeah, but no, just I think just finally, just thank you, Gosia, and we look forward to talking to you again in the not too far distant future. So thank you very much.